The sun was just beginning to set as I pulled into the cul-de-sac of Ridgewood Estates, a quiet, tree-lined suburb known more for its tidy lawns and strict HOA policies than anything resembling real diversity. The moving truck had beaten me there by 20 minutes, its back already open, with a couple of strong-backed men unloading boxes like they were racing a stopwatch. I stepped out of my car in full uniform, not for show, but because my shift had run late again. I didn't plan to make a scene, but there was something satisfying about stepping into this exclusive neighborhood with my commander's badge still clipped to my chest. First impressions matter, and I knew the kind of impression my presence alone might make here. I'd only taken a few steps toward my new home when I heard the unmistakable clearing of a throat, sharp, intentional, and clearly designed to draw attention. She stood about 20 feet away, arms folded, blonde bob stiff in the wind, and a clipboard held tight like a weapon. Her presence screamed, HOA President, and the name tag pinned to her salmon cardigan confirmed it. Karen Whitmore, President, Ridgewood Estates, HOA. "Can I help you?" she called out, though it was more accusation than offer. Her eyes darted to the movers and then back to me, as if trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite make sense in her worldview. "I live here now," I said plainly, walking past her toward the porch, where a box labeled Kitchen, Fragile, sat like an unattended child. "Commander Jackson." She blinked, visibly recalibrating. "Oh, I didn't realize the new homeowner was moving in today. We usually ask for advance notice for community disruptions." "Disruptions?" I echoed, arching an eyebrow. "The truck," she clarified quickly. "It's blocking partial access to the mailbox cluster. Just a reminder for next time." I nodded without offering an apology. I was used to this dance. The polite tone layered over suspicion, the emphasis on rules only when they applied to people who didn't fit in. It wasn't new, and it didn't bother me much anymore. But I noticed her son watching from the lawn across the street, a teenage boy with a buzz cut and a scowl, arms crossed, eyes narrow. He wasn't even trying to hide it. That was the first look. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, at least on the surface. I unpacked what I could, thanked the movers with generous tips, and stood at the threshold of my new home with a quiet sense of triumph. Not because I'd bought into this neighborhood, but because I knew who I was, and no HOA president or brooding teen was going to rattle that. But the feeling didn't last. The next morning, I was in my patrol car, dressed in civvies but wearing my badge on my belt, standard policy for off-duty carry, on my way back from a grocery run. The trunk was full: milk, bread, fruit, some cleaning supplies, and the rare treat I like to keep for myself, salted caramel ice cream from the little local shop near Precinct HQ. I'd pulled into my driveway and just popped the trunk when I heard a voice, young, cocky, and entirely uninvited. "Yo, you gonna share some of that?" I turned around to see Tyler, Karen's son, striding across my lawn with zero hesitation. He was wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big and a pair of sagging jeans, trying way too hard to imitate something he'd only seen on TV. "Excuse me?" I asked, straightening up. I said, "You gonna share some of that food?" he repeated, and now there was something in his tone that wasn't quite playful. Entitlement, disrespect, a test. "Pretty sure you've got your own kitchen," I replied calmly. "Unless this is your way of saying hello." He laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You think you're better than us or something? Rolling in here with your cop car, acting like you own the block." "I do own this house," I said, "and I serve this community, which includes you, even if you don't show much appreciation for it." That should have ended it. But Tyler took a step closer, too close for comfort, and suddenly I could see it. This wasn't just teenage rebellion. This was learned behavior. Inherited hate. Taught by the same woman who claimed mailbox obstruction was a disruption. You people always think you can buy your way into places, he said, and that's when I felt it shift. Not just words now, there was venom. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera app, and made it very clear I was recording. That was enough to make him pause, but not retreat. Figures, he muttered. Running to your phone. Just wait till my mom hears about this. And that was how it started. I had just finished unloading the last of the groceries when I saw Karen pacing on her porch across the street. Her phone was pressed tightly to her ear, lips pursed, eyes locked on me like I was a criminal casing the neighborhood. I knew that posture, the stiff shoulders, the deliberate glances, the stage whisper, like she was trying to make a performance out of being threatened. I'd seen it before. Hell, I'd had officers called on me when I was in plain clothes doing off-duty work. It never surprised me anymore. But I never expected it in my own driveway. She's calling the cops, a voice muttered behind me. My neighbor, Miguel, stood at his fence with a watering can and a raised eyebrow. We'd met briefly the day before, exchanged names, and he'd brought over a bottle of wine as a welcome gift. Kind guy, ex-military. I've seen her do this to the Amazon guy last month. She's like a hall monitor with a 911 obsession. I gave him a small smile. Well, this should be interesting. Karen wasn't subtle. She walked back and forth, clearly enunciating every word into the phone like she was reading a script. I caught phrases. Aggressive behavior. Suspicious man. And of course, I don't feel safe. The classic trifecta. She even added, he may be armed, as if that wasn't standard for off-duty law enforcement. I didn't bother confronting her. There was no point. I just leaned against the trunk of my car and waited. Miguel stayed nearby, watching. A few more neighbors peeked through blinds and windows, drawn by the familiar flashing lights that arrived not 5 minutes later. 2 squad cars. That was overkill for a grocery dispute, and I knew it. But I also knew the officers inside those cars. One of them, Officer Gina Morales, was a sharp, no-nonsense patrol lead who I had personally promoted. The other, Officer Brett Kingsley, was newer, more eager, sometimes too quick to jump, but he respected the chain of command. I watched them step out of the cars, radios clipped to their shoulders, eyes scanning the scene. And then they saw me. Commander Jackson. Morales blinked, already lowering her hand from her utility belt. Sir, what's going on? Karen froze mid-stride, phone still in her hand. Her face morphed in slow motion, from indignant concern to confusion, to the unmistakable dread of realization. She looked at me, looked at the officers, then back at me. You know him, she asked, voice tight. Morales exchanged a glance with Kingsley before stepping forward. Yes, ma'am. This is Commander Elijah Jackson. He oversees the entire 7th District. We report directly to him. Karen's jaw went slack. The silence between us hung like humid air. She struggled to process it, like her brain had short-circuited. But he was threatening. I was unloading groceries, I said calmly. Your son approached me, not the other way around. Kingsley shifted uncomfortably. Morales stayed stone-faced. Karen looked to her son, who was now standing on their porch, trying to look innocent but failing miserably. Tyler said, he said you were... I recorded it, I interrupted. Would you like me to show the footage to the responding officers, or shall I forward it directly to Internal Affairs as a misuse of emergency services? Karen's face turned a shade redder than I thought skin could manage. Her mouth opened, then closed. No words came out. I'd advise against making false police reports in the future, Morales said, not unkindly but firmly. That can carry serious consequences, ma'am. Karen stammered. I didn't know. That I was a cop, I asked. Or that I was your neighbor. The silence this time was deafening. A couple of other neighbors had stepped outside now, drawn by the sirens. No one spoke. Everyone just watched as the woman who thought she could wield power through fear and assumption realized she'd picked the wrong man this time. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with the HOA," I said quietly. "You've created a hostile living environment on my first day here." Karen looked like she wanted to vanish into the earth. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." "That's funny," I said, walking past her toward my front door. "Because that's exactly what you meant to do." I didn't look back as the officers returned to their vehicles. I could feel Karen's eyes on my back, heavy with embarrassment and bruised ego. Tyler had already disappeared inside. When I stepped into my kitchen, I laughed for the first time that day. Because karma doesn't always knock politely. Sometimes it shows up in uniform and carries a badge that outranks everyone else in the room. The days that followed the incident with Karen and her son passed quietly. Too quietly. Ridgewood Estates had the kind of forced politeness that smelled like lavender but tasted like vinegar. People waved with tight smiles. Conversations dropped when I walked past. The neighborhood Facebook group, once filled with bake sale reminders and lost cat posts, was suddenly buzzing with vague messages about recent tensions and strangers disturbing the harmony. I'd barely settled in, and I was already the subject of polite paranoia. The shift at the precinct was no less complicated. News of the incident had spread fast, thanks mostly to Morales, who didn't hesitate to share the story in the locker room with the kind of bemused outrage only a seasoned officer could deliver. Most of the squad supported me, of course. Some laughed. Others were quietly angry. But one or two, I could see it in their eyes. They didn't like that I'd embarrassed a civilian. As if being racially profiled on your own property and responding with restraint was somehow unbecoming of command. One afternoon, about a week after moving in, I returned home to find a note taped to my mailbox. It wasn't signed, and the handwriting was that forced cursive you find on PTA bake sale signs. It simply read, "You don't belong here. Your power won't protect you forever." I stood there for a minute, letting the words sink in. Not because I believed them, far from it, but because it was so absurd. The passive aggression had finally taken off its gloves. I folded the note neatly and took it inside. I didn't report it, not yet. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go. Meanwhile, Tyler was escalating. He never came near my property again, not directly. But I caught him watching from his window, phone in hand. Once, I saw him pretend to take a jog, only to slow walk past my driveway and mutter something under his breath about affirmative action cops. He was playing a game, testing limits, seeing if he could provoke a reaction that would prove whatever nonsense Karen had told him about people like me. I didn't give him one. Instead, I documented everything, footage, photos, a running log, not because I was afraid, but because I knew one day soon the story would flip, and I'd need facts, not feelings. The next HOA meeting was where things began to tilt. Karen, of course, presided like a queen over her court of beige cardigans and country club smiles. I attended not to participate, but to observe. I sat near the back, quietly flipping through the agenda, when Karen cleared her throat and addressed the room. "I'd like to raise a new proposal," she said, her voice calm and syrupy sweet. "In light of recent disturbances, I believe we should require all new homeowners to attend a neighborhood orientation, just a short presentation to go over community guidelines, safety expectations, and decorum." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Of course it did. Who would object to safety and decorum? But I knew exactly what this was. I raised my hand. "Madam President," I said, every word deliberate, "are these orientations going to be retroactively applied? Because I don't recall such a requirement when the Johnsons moved in 3 months ago. Karen smiled at me, the kind of smile you use on a child who said something embarrassing in public. Well, this is a new policy, Commander, given recent concerns. Are those concerns based on an official police report? I asked, because I'd be very interested in reading it. Silence. No one dared speak. Karen shifted in her seat. This is simply a preventive measure. Then I assume it applies to everyone, not just select individuals, I said. Otherwise it would be discriminatory. A few heads nodded around the room, not out of support, but discomfort. The kind of nod you give when you're worried someone might be recording. Karen backed down, but the message was clear. If they couldn't remove me with rules, they'd try with rituals. Humiliation dressed as tradition. Later that night, as I walked back to my house, I found a small pile of trash on my lawn. Food wrappers, empty soda cans, a broken egg. Tyler's signature, no doubt. I sighed, pulled out my phone, and took a photo. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was collecting. The real escalation came on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks later. I was off duty, dressed in gym clothes, standing in line at the Ridgewood Co-op, an overpriced organic market where locals shopped mostly for the sake of being seen shopping. I had a basket with a few basics: eggs, turkey, oatmeal. I was flipping through my phone when I heard the now familiar voice behind me. You know, I'm surprised they let you in here. It was Tyler, this time with 2 friends, same smug swagger, same sideways cap. They stood behind me like they were filming a YouTube prank. "Excuse me," I said, turning slowly. "Just saying," he shrugged. "Seems like you're more of a corner store type." The cashier went rigid. A woman in yoga pants 2 aisles over stopped pretending to look at cereal. Everyone froze. This was the moment. But I didn't rise to it. I smiled, calm, professional. "Do me a favor, Tyler," I said. "Go home. You're bad at this." He looked confused. "At what?" "At being a threat," I said. "You're too obvious, too loud. Real danger is quieter." And with that, I turned, paid for my items, and walked out. 10 minutes later, I got a call from dispatch. Commander Jackson, we got a complaint from Ridgewood Co-op. A teenager named Tyler Whitmore said you threatened him in public." "Of course he did." "Let me guess," I said. "No witnesses, no video, just his word." "Pretty much," the dispatcher replied, sighing. "Morales is already on it. She's not buying it either." I nodded to myself. The pattern was clear now. They couldn't scare me. So they'd try to dirty me, build a record. Death by 1,000 fake complaints. But they didn't realize. They weren't the only ones playing the long game. Back at home, I opened the folder on my computer labeled Ridgewood. Inside were timestamps, photos, audio files, every egg, every note, every HOA email. I wasn't collecting this for revenge. I was building a case, not just against Karen or Tyler, but against the entire idea that people like me had to constantly prove we belonged in places we had earned the right to be. They wanted a fight. They were about to get justice. The email came at 6:47 a.m., just as I was finishing my first cup of coffee. It was short, 2 sentences long. HOA board is initiating a formal complaint process against you for harassment and community misconduct. A hearing will be held in the Ridgewood Community Center this Friday. I smiled, not because I was amused, but because I had been expecting it. This was their last play. Karen had finally pulled enough strings, made enough noise, manipulated just enough nervous, clueless neighbors to put the plan in motion. They wanted to humiliate me publicly, strip me of standing, maybe even push for some obscure clause to try and revoke my home ownership. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I'd been preparing for this for weeks. The night of the hearing, the Ridgewood Community Center was packed, not just with HOA members, but with curious neighbors, city staff, and a handful of reporters who'd caught wind of something controversial happening in one of the county's most exclusive neighborhoods. The tension was thick. Karen sat at the front table like she was presiding over a criminal trial, flanked by two other board members who looked more nervous than prepared. I walked in wearing full-dress blues, commander stripes, badge gleaming, and behind me, as quiet as shadows, walked Morales, Kingsley, and two other officers from my district, off-duty, but in uniform. Not for intimidation, but for representation. They knew what was happening here wasn't about me alone. It was about all of us who'd ever been told, directly or through whispers, that we didn't fit in. Karen cleared her throat, tapping her mic. "Thank you all for coming. Tonight's meeting concerns serious allegations of harassment and conduct unbecoming of a Ridgewood resident, specifically regarding Mr. Elijah Jackson." I raised my hand before she could continue. "That's Commander Elijah Jackson. I'd prefer we use full titles tonight. For the record." A murmur spread through the room. Karen's smile twitched. She pushed forward. "There have been multiple complaints, verbal altercations, intimidation tactics, filming minors without consent." "False," I said, loud enough for the recorder to catch. "All of which I will address in order, with documented evidence and verified statements." And then I opened my folder. One by one, I laid it all out. Printed emails, HOA correspondence, cell phone footage of Tyler trespassing, dumping garbage, initiating every verbal encounter, time-stamped reports, character witness letters from neighbors, including Miguel and 3 other residents who had quietly supported me since day 1. Then I played the final video. Tyler, outside the co-op, clearly saying, "I'm surprised they let you in here," laughing with his friends. Silence followed. Then a few gasps. One board member leaned over to whisper something to Karen. She brushed him off. But her face, tight, pale, jaw clenched, told the truth. She knew it was over. I stood up. "I am not here to plead for belonging," I said. "I paid for my house, just like every other person in this neighborhood. I serve this city. I protect people who don't even want me living next to them. And I've done it without stepping out of line, without lowering myself to the level some here have sunk to." I turned to the audience. "You want to talk about conduct unbecoming? How about weaponizing the police against a fellow citizen? Teaching your children hate? Spreading lies to remove someone just because they make you uncomfortable?" The room was silent. Karen stood, flustered. "This isn't about race, Commander. It's about safety and—" I held up a hand. "Don't finish that sentence. It won't go well for you." She sat down. Hard. The board went into private deliberation. 15 minutes that felt like a funeral procession. When they returned, the senior member, a mild-mannered retired dentist named Mr. Halverson, cleared his throat. "We find the allegations against Commander Jackson to be entirely unsubstantiated. No further action will be taken. Additionally, the board will recommend a policy review regarding abuse of authority and false claims within the HOA. This meeting is adjourned." A few claps broke out. I didn't turn to see who. Karen grabbed her bag and stormed out. Tyler followed, eyes low, swagger gone. No more cameras, no more games. Outside, Morales gave me a small nod. "Told you they'd fold under pressure." "They always do," I replied. As I walked back home, neighbors I barely knew offered quiet nods, small apologies. Some stopped me, said things like, "I had no idea," or "I'm glad you stood up for yourself." It wasn't a parade, but it was enough. I hadn't come to Ridgewood to be liked. I'd come to live, and no one was going to take that from me. Weeks later, a for sale sign appeared on Karen's lawn. Rumor was she'd been asked to step down from the board. Tyler disappeared from public view. No more trash, no more notes. Peace had finally come. But more than that, respect had been earned. Not because I raised my voice, not because I played their game, but because I documented, stood tall, and let the truth shine. And sometimes, that's all it takes to turn a neighborhood into a community. Even Ridgewood. The end.